Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians at the DNA company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is in your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by a personal doctor, therapist, and other healthcare professionals. Welcome, everybody. So today we're going to take a topic that's normally reserved for women and apply it to men. Guys are starting to feel left out. You know, a big part of our audience is women, and we say that when it comes to healthcare, that's the area that needs the most support. And the challenge has always been that clinical research science is all rooted on male anatomy and the male hormone rhythm, everything about testing to design to protocols, clinical trials. And this is why healthcare fails women so much. Now we have a heavy focus on supporting women, and we've kind of lost the truth of what men need. Kind of this change. It's kind of like Republicans versus Democrat. You have this swing that keeps going on. And right now we're all working with women. So I'm going to come back to supporting male through their hormone cascades and understanding, again, knowledge that we've lost that even a generation ago we knew what it is with the big items like hair, libido, fitness, muscle, what's going on in today's reality. A lot what you're seeing with sort of the feminization of men, and you're seeing a change culturally in what we even believe manhood is. And a lot of that has to do with hormones. And I'm going to get into that today. So, firstly, the cascade. Men and women actually do the exact same thing. We make progesterone, we then make estrogen, we then make testosterone in the middle, and we make estrogen. It's the same genes from the CYP family and the clearance genes that do the job for both men and women. The volumes are obviously a little different. You know, even if the genes are pointing to more testosterone, that still means a lot more estrogen in a typical woman than a man. And that's what develops and causes the female form, fertility, etc. Same thing with a man. But the cascade is the same, which means we can look for the same red flags, the same warning signs, and intervene in the same areas. So, having said that, the priorities are different. The problems are different, and the priorities are different. The opportunities are different. If you talk to a man about what problems he's trying to solve versus a woman, they're very different. And that's why I say the priorities are different. So let's talk about the first one. So men often are worried about, let's say, fitness, strength, right? So you have to understand that the hormone cascade for men, as I said, is the same for women, but as opposed to this 28-day menstrual cycle, you have a daily menstrual cycle. We do the exact same thing, but every single day. So why is this important? Because the variability of outcome for a woman that happens during those 28 days is not the same. We have a 24-hour clock that we have to pay attention to, including when you're dealing with your fitness. Now, for example, if you're to train and work out, what time is ideal for you? How do you know? Well, you have to understand how efficiently you make testosterone. So there's genes in between. I think it's CYP17A1 will determine how efficiently you actually make testosterone. Anyone who has the reports can take a look. Then there's CYP3A4 that will determine how efficiently you maintain that testosterone. So some men actually make it quite well, but they bleed it out, they clear it. At some point, you have to expel and detoxify your hormones. And some men may do that a little too efficiently, and so the testosterone isn't there for long enough. Some men retain it. Some men, through the SRD5A2 pathway, convert it into what we call DHT, dihydrotestosterone, a potent manly man version that will give you a nice, ripped, lean muscle fiber. It will give you the ability to burn fat a little more efficiently. And it's kind of like, well, I don't go to the gym, but this is how I look. Yeah, it's your hormones that are doing that for you. And so, in that cascade, and by the way, last step, how efficiently do you convert it to estrogen comes into play. So, the body type and fitness and scheduling is dependent on this cascade. What you ideally want to see is that you're making a lot of testosterone, You do not bleed it out through the CYP3A4 pathway. You might make a little bit of DHT, and you do not quickly convert into estrogen. Typical longevity prototype for a male. The thin, wiry, lanky guy. And if you think about a 100-year-old man, you're usually picturing someone that's sort of tall and thin, right? And the hormones are driving that. So testosterone doesn't mean big and strong. It actually means lean. Then when you get into the DHT, you start to use words like ripped, and you start to use words like, abs and muscle fiber and shoulders and rippling, because you're getting that extra edge on the testosterone. It's when you get into estrogens that you start to use words like big, strong. And this is a very big misconception when it comes to male fitness. We think that testosterone is strong and estrogen is weak. The truth is we need both. And the ideal combos, if you picture like a Superman or a Captain America, there's somewhat of a balance of both because they have the strength, but they also have some size. They're not Dwayne the Rock Johnsons, which is potentially a lot more estrogenized to get that mass, that big size. And they're also not Spider-Man, or a rock singer who's a tall, skinny guy, potentially strong still, but can't get big, can't grow. So knowing this allows you to understand what time to exercise and how often. Because if you are that guy that holds on to your testosterone, doesn't clear it, you may not need to do it as much to maintain the outward appearance of fitness. I'm not talking about health at the moment, just fitness. If you are the guy that doesn't make enough or bleeds it too quick, well, then you may need to do it a little more often or more aggressively and at the right time because our testosterone peaks from the moment we wake up for the next couple hours. So, say the average person gets out of bed somewhere 6 to 8 a.m. That's around the time when you're going to have peak testosterone, and it is the best potential time to go to the gym. If you're more androgenized, maybe it matters a little less because you have more free flowing testosterone during the day. If you're more estrogenized, which means you convert that testosterone into estrogen right after that window, so by 10 a.m. you're already fully estrogenized, well, then you've lost that window for peak strength, right? Peak performance. You have a second peak later in the day between, say, 4 to 6 p.m. And this is given average sleeping windows. Of course, this would shift depending what time you sleep. And so if you miss the first one, there's a second opportunity to do whatever you need to do and get that testosterone flowing to support you and get a better outcome at the gym. And you can test this and literally go to the gym one day at 8 a.m., at noon, and at 5 p.m. And you'll potentially see three different outcomes in how much you're able to lift and how long you're able to go and energy levels. Now, if you consider that in between all of this, there's a receptor that actually binds your testosterone, the AR pathway. We can actually determine now we know how much we made, or how much did I use? Similarly to vitamin D or other micronutrients, even with your hormones or your neurochemicals of your brain, with your hormones, you can try and nuance the cascade a little bit by considering how efficiently do I bind this stuff? Do I actually use it? And that may be the difference between, well, I see the hormone map, but this guy doesn't look like the way you're describing. Well, maybe he doesn't bind it efficiently. Or this person looks really jacked, but he doesn't really have the hormones you're talking about. Well, maybe he binds really efficiently. So, what triggers binding? If you have that efficient or non-efficient receptor, can you actually change the expression of the gene to get more outcome out of it, to use more testosterone, to have more strength, to have more vitality and vigor? Stretching. Picture the yogi. Picture the person, your typical in India yogi who is 90 years old, who can stretch his leg behind his head and does some crazy deep breathing exercises. You're picturing a somewhat thin, lanky, very lean man, right? If you're picturing a man, that is testosterone. And that all that stretching activates the androgen receptor. It's a common trait. And so this is why when you do stretch regularly, it's much easier to get lean. It's much easier to have that strength. It's much easier to, well, that guy's not so big. How is he lifting that much? And you see this quite often. And some of us that are blessed with the efficient androgen receptor, maybe this is less of a concern. But for those of you that feel stuck, a simple thing that you could deploy to manage your hormones better. Now, the person that is more estrogenized has to consider when it comes to fitness and body, a lot of what we're doing around fitness, when it comes to supplements you may take, even hormones to optimize results, are teetering on how do I give this guy more testosterone? Right? That's the outcome. You'll see supplements that say testosterone levels 600% higher within a month. You'll see guys injecting TRT, not quite steroids, but some mild testosterone. If you are estrogen dominant as a man, so yes, you do make a lot of testosterone, but then your CYP19A1 gene converts all of that testosterone into estrogen. What happens if you add more testosterone? It becomes more estrogen. And I can tell you that during our research phase, we spent a lot of time working with professional athletes. And being in Toronto, we spent a lot of time working on hockey players. Toronto is a mecca of hockey training. All the best trainers are here. The players come here from all over North America to train. And in that, or I think it was 2019 or 18, there was this phenomenon where all these players were coming to us saying, I don't know what happened. I felt okay. And now I'm not even at okay. I feel horrible. And what are the symptoms? Well, my mood is a little off. I have anxiety. I'm like triggered very easily. But worst of all, I'm growing these man boobs, gynomastia. We found that there was this trend around giving players what's called an androgel pack, so androgen, testosterone, in a gel that you put on your belly in this pack, and your skin absorbs it. And seemingly, you would think, I gave this guy testosterone. He has more testosterone now. So it's better for him as an athlete. If you have the fast CYP19A1 gene and I give you a heavy dose of testosterone, what I did was give you the fuel to fire your estrogen pathway. And that's what was happening in not all, but some of these players that had that pathway. And so they went from athlete to man boobs, truly. And it didn't take long because hormones dictate what's happening to your body. And if you give someone fuel for the fire, you're going to see the fire increase. And so the solution for the coaches was they probably need more testosterone. And imagine what the outcome of that would have been. We saw loss of libido, but we also saw benefits of hair and skin. And that's the next thing we're going to talk about is we now know this cascade can affect the outcome of your physical outward appearance, your results at the gym, the difference between here's my goal and here's where I'm at. Now, how do I bridge that? Do you have the right goal for based on your foundational body type? And if you don't, there's two options. Either you change the goal and become the best version of what you were designed to be and understand what that is, or fitness and food is not enough. You have to augment the hormone pathway. It might mean taking supplements to slow CYP19A1 down. Well, I want to be a gymnast. I don't want to be big. I just want to be lean and strong. Okay, well, if you make too much testosterone or estrogen, sorry, you maybe were designed to be a linebacker and you have the wrong goal. And it doesn't matter how much you work out, it's not going to get you there. You need to actually take supplements to slow that gene pathway down. And we now know what those are. So that's body, easy to intervene and know who you are. But these same things translate, like I said, into skin, hair, and we've seen as another example of what we saw with those hockey players, they did come out with glowing skin and beautiful hair, and they felt prettier than they ever felt. And so the same androgen gel pack that was being converted into estrogen that caused them to have performance issues and gynomastia led to beautiful hair and skin. So if you look at me, I don't look like I should be the guy talking about hair. What does this guy know? He doesn't even have any. I can tell you that that's a result of my hormones. So I do make a lot of testosterone and I do make a version called DHT. And DHT is known to be death to hair follicles, a potent toxin in terms of the survival of follicles and hair follicle potential. So, when you do what I do and you make too much of it, you can expect by your late 20s that you start to see some loss, and maybe by your mid 30s, your hairline just isn't the same anymore. And so the answer isn't so much I need to put some creams and Rogaine and minoxidil, or I need a surgery, or all of those things potentially may work. But if we understand the root cause, and we know that DHT, and there are other root causes, by the way, but the primary driver of male pattern baldness, and women also, is DHT. So if I'm just able to block the DHT, that conversion, that pathway, the testosterone going down the SRD 5A2 pathway and being converted into DHT, I still have my testosterone, but I'm not making the toxic version. The trade off, maybe I can't see my six pack anymore. Maybe those ripped muscle fibers in my shoulder aren't so ripply anymore, but I got my hair. And that's the very first thing I said about how do we prioritize? What are the priorities? They may be different for men and women, what we're concerned about. Um, a lot of them are also the same. And this allows you to make a decision. I now know why my body does this. And I have a choice to have this in terms of outcome, in terms of muscle fiber, or have this in terms of hair potential. Or maybe somewhere in the middle if you can get really good at tweaking and balancing, or if you're working with a clinician that has some experience there. So you'll see that some of the drugs like Propecia that are designed around balding target DHT. And so the pharmaceutical world also knows right now why it happens, right? But we're not told, you could take some simple supplements to slow that pathway down. Instead, we wait to mask it, right? The other challenge is the chemicals that are in current hair products. They often can lead to leaching of chemicals into your scalp, like formaldehyde, for example. Who wants to put formaldehyde on their scalp? We're doing it. If you're buying your standard, global brand type shampoos, and that leads to follicle death. And no surprise, the same companies that own those brands also own the hair growth products. So there's a little bit of math there, and you can figure out why they do this, but this is what's being done. So understand that yes, some of it is topical, some of it is stress, some of it is like we talk about, amongst family. Oh, he's so stressed out, his hair's falling out. He's putting nonsense product in his hair's falling out. Yes, there's truth to that. The foundational truth is DHT kills your hair follicles. So the first of all, am I balding or not? Right? Now, how bad is it? Let's start adding other factors like chemicals and stress. So, having said all that, these products that I just mentioned, and this perhaps may be the most important thing we talk about today, which is when we talk about women's health, it's very hard to have a conversation without talking about hormone disruption. And almost every conversation takes us there. We don't often have this conversation for men. It's very important because you're seeing the phenomenon. There's a cultural shift in the estrogenization of men. And this is not an awakening. This is not a people coming out, let's say. There's some truth to that, right? But this major swing in numbers has to do with hormone disruption. The same shampoos I talked about also have phthalates, also have parabens, also have forever chemicals. Your sunscreen has them. You know, all of these products, your soap, your face wash, all these products that we're inundating ourselves with, that we're putting literally hundreds of chemicals per day on our body, are hormone disrupting. What does that mean? The nature of the molecule, when it enters the body thinks it's estrogen. It doesn't know how to categorize it. And so it takes that product and utilizes it as if it was estrogen, and the estrogen receptors start to bind it, and all of a sudden they mimic estrogen. We call them estrogen mimics, which means you become more estrogenized, which means you have more female traits. Your body changes, your hair and skin changes, your priorities change. You become less of a warrior, more of a worrier. Picture the 1980s male, the warrior's male, before this massive onslaught of hormone disruption really hit us. And he had big muscles, he was angry, he was a bully, he smelled bad, he was a man. Today's superhero doesn't look the same. And the reality is that our hormones are being disrupted, and men are becoming more estrogenized, which is changing our net outcome in terms of mood, body, vigor, all of what you would picture between a Viking and somebody who's a little more mild, let's say. So it's important to consider this because we now know, and this is not just functional medicine science, conspiracy theory type knowledge. If you go Google right now, sperm count 2045, the year 2045, you will see mainstream news saying zero. What do they mean? That there has been a 1% decline in male fertility rates, sperm counts, for some time now. And based on the trend, we're going to be at zero by 2045. Well, guess what? They checked that again recently, and that is now increased to 2.64%, from 1 to 2.64. So that 2045 it is actually a lofty goal right now. It's probably going to happen sooner. Because of what we're doing to ourselves and exposing ourselves to, male hormones are being disrupted just as much as women. And this doesn't just lead to shifts in outward appearance and mood, it also leads to shifts in cardiovascular health and diabetes and cancers, etc., because testosterone is protective against some of those things. And we're seeing all of a sudden younger men with older problems. And you're going to see more of that. And we have not changed. Our culture has not changed. The threats that we're fighting against have changed. And we don't yet know that there's a dial that's been turned and our estrogenization is being ramped up and androgenization is being slowed down by the chemicals that we're constantly exposed to. And the challenge is some of them are in the category that we call forever chemicals. What does that mean? They don't break down. So when a woman flushes her tampon in the toilet or pees out birth control, those hormones don't break down. They didn't get sort of used by the body. They just whatever exited in its true active form. The forever chemicals that are in the paints and plastics and different products that we use, again, as they enter our water system, food system, do not break down. They continue to threat in cycles. And so the total aggregate keeps increasing because it's not only what we use, but it's also what we used that we're compounding on top of. There was some data recently where some major petrochemical companies in the US were sued because we're finding forever chemicals in the water from things like picture a car wash or a emergency response to a fire, usage of chemicals that just end up going in the drain, right? Foam, soaps, etc. Which again, we see it disappear and it's out of sight, out of mind. But in reality, it just got recycled back into our system. It's in our water, it's in our ground, it's in our food. So it's a whole new consideration for not only women, but men. There's a layer of health that we're not practicing, which is not just how I feel, what I do at the gym, but what is my environment doing to my hormones? And who am I going to become if I ignore this? Your sperm counts are going to go down. Your male sex organs are going to shrink. Your vigor is going to disappear. Your body will not give you the outcome at the gym that you desire. Your mood is going to change. All because you're going to become estrogenized, far beyond what you were initially designed to be. For women, it's a whole other layer of problems from, breast cancer, endometriosis, all of these estrogen type conditions get exaggerated. And that's why we're seeing these things in higher numbers. We're seeing that 30% of couples now have to go through fertility treatment. That was unheard of a couple generations ago. Unheard of. And it's both because the women are overly exposed to estrogen mimics and the men are overly exposed to estrogen mimics. So that combination, equals a couple that can't conceive. And you're seeing it over and over and over again. So, major important factor, it's not just here's my hormones, here's what I do, but here's the context I'm in. Here's my reality that I have to fight another threat that I didn't have to fight a generation ago. There's a chemical in the water called atrazine, and some of you may have seen this viral clip from Robert Kennedy Jr., who's running for the United States president office, where he talked about this experiment of this chemical that's in our water, by the way, where when you expose frogs to it in a lab, just to test, and this is what they did to understand the outcome, that they literally lost their male reproductive parts. That's how aggressive of an estrogen mimic it is. Now imagine this is in your drinking water. That's the reality we now live in. And it's very important to consider, not to give you a doomsday Debbie Downer experience, but more so to open your eyes to another tool you need to add to your toolkit that is for a lot of us completely outside of our awareness. We don't understand that the foods we eat, the water we drink, the products that we put in our body, the soap that we wash our children with, are estrogen mimics that are driving estrogenization. And we're becoming different people, not because of our genes and who we are, but because of the epigenetics of what we expose ourselves to. So, very important consideration. Now, moving on, how do you counter some of this stuff? What do you do? We know that there's certain ingredients that help support, if you want to maintain that healthy hormone, it depends where you're at in the cascade. If you are more estrogenized, we know of a well spoken of uh, supplement called DIM. It's a broccoli extract, and we know that it changes the gene expression of the CYP19A1 pathway. So for a man that wants more healthy testosterone, that does not want to convert into estrogen, taking some DIM will help with that. We know that fenugreek and EGCG, a green tea extract, will help with the slowing down of DHT and help you have more healthy testosterone. So there's things you can do. We also know that for men, the same consideration of toxic estrogen. So some of you may have heard us talking about this before, where after you make estrogen, which is the last step in the hormone cascade, you then potentially convert it into a metabolite. 4-hydroxyestrogen, 16-hydroxy, which are both toxic, or 2, the good clean stuff. And we've seen this direct correlation in our research, where the men that make 16, the toxic version, the mother has breast cancer and the son has testicular cancer. So a major threat to look out for. This is now looking out into the future. If you have your DNA in hand, it's like this GPS that's guiding you down this path of life, and you're able to look far down that road and see which tree fell over. And if you're estrogen dominant as a male, and you're fast in the the CYP3A4 pathway, which makes 16-hydroxyestrogen, then the tree that you see falling over 100 yards or maybe 10 kilometers down the road, depending how old you are, is testicular cancer. And so we don't need to wait and see. Right? We don't need to wait. It's in my family. It's in my genes. Cancer is in your genes. It's not in your genes. The toxic insult that causes the cancer is in your genes. Now that you know that, you can break the cycle of cancer. So an important consideration for men, we also know that DHT causes prostate enlargement. So that unhealthy prostate, why is this happening to me? Because the same thing that's killing your hair follicles is also enlarging your prostate. And that could lead to potentially bigger problems. So the big male question marks, that we worry ourselves over, and you're going to hear this during a male health month, Movember, right, where we're all growing our beards, mine grows all year round, to celebrate and bring advocacy around male cancers. Um, think about where they come from. We can spend, as we have, hundreds of millions of dollars on research as a society trying to get rid of cancer, or we can simply ask the question, why does it happen? And if I can target that, I don't need to wait to treat it. I can know that I just took that detour on my life GPS because I saw that tree falling down the road because my genes are telling me so. And now all of a sudden, I picked a better route that doesn't include the tree, doesn't include the cancer, doesn't include prostate enlargement, doesn't include hair loss, doesn't include lack of muscle as I age, which is so important because I now know exactly how my hormones work and what epigenetics, what habits, what environment, what nutrition, what lifestyle I need to add to be the best version of myself. So having said all this, there are nuances far beyond what I talked about today, but this lays out a foundation for you to understand hormones in the context of a male body. Understanding what does the cascade look like? Where do I need to look to understand what to prioritize? Is it too much testosterone, too much estrogen, not enough of either one? Do I get rid of it too fast? Do I not bind it efficiently? Where's that piece of that puzzle that's broken? I then can ask myself, well, what are my epigenetic factors that I need to consider? My environment, what am I breathing? My lifestyle, what am I doing for exercise? And so do I actually push my body to maintain testosterone levels? Do I signal back to my body that I want to stay young and strong by pushing heavy things and going to the gym? And what about my nutrition? Is the food that I'm eating laced in estrogen mimics and packaging? Is the food that I'm eating, blocking certain receptors and activating more estrogen? Estrogenized food, which there are plenty, and you can research those. There's tons of food that you can cut out that maybe over estrogenized you. So that triangulation of environment, nutrition, and lifestyle over your genetic map will give you the net answer, just like it does for everything else. And you'll know, here's how I train, here's how I eat, here's what I ignore, here's the supplements I need to take. And by the way, here's how I live to 120 with good health, walking, playing with my great grandchildren, and not worrying about chronic disease because I took all those detours and avoided it all. So with that, I present to you male hormones. Enjoy the talk and start making these changes so you can feel better.